part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole.
Last episode, we watched a movie that had one of Nicole's favorite coworkers in it. And today we're going to talk about a movie that has one of my favorite coworkers in it.
We wanted to do something a bit different, as we've been talking about a lot of films that we would consider really excellent period dramas. And as you may have noticed, we've been just really praising everything kind of to the high heavens. So we thought we'd go to the other end of the spectrum and pick a film that isn't very well regarded, but we may have gone too far.
Yeah, this is definitely on the complete opposite side of the spectrum. And in my defense, I did not know there was like this whole super natural, otherworldly aspect to it. So I genuinely thought this was a pure period drama that was just a hot mess.
So if you haven't guessed by the title of the episode, we're going to be talking about The Great Wall. And there's a lot to be said about this movie, but before we share our thoughts, we actually wanted to see what other people thought of it. I looked up some reviews while I was watching because I was like, am I just in a bad mood or is this genuinely this bad? And I discovered that this film has a lot of half-star reviews on Letterboxd, which I also discovered while logging my review of this film is the lowest score that you can give.
So we decided to share some of these in real time as we look over them so that we can all react together at the hilarity of Letterboxd.
So we've gone to the Letterboxd page for the film and we've sorted it by lowest review first. And I will say someone named Tom watched this film today and his review was just and he's not wrong.
He's really not wrong. Poor Ellen Tan here just watched this movie yesterday. So apparently we're really scraping the bottom of quarantine films. And asked, can I turn back time? This movie is such a waste. Good concept, but bad execution. Bad pairing with Mark Wahlberg and Pedro Pascal. Oh,
Mark
such
Wahlberg.
a joke. Oh.
Let's see. Oh, this one, Kyle Cooper says, The Great Time Waster. Are people actually serious when making a movie like this? Did Matt Damon just do this for the kicks? Can a CGI movie actually be good? Is Edward Zwick the most average filmmaker? He helped write the story. Can I get $150 million and Matt Damon and try again?
Look, I'm just saying you're not going to make a good movie with Matt Damon in it.
Okay, it can be done, but you never know. It
Yes.
could. Unicorns could exist.
Ooh, check out this review. It says, Matt Damon fought a lot of things in this film, but I just wanted to fight Matt Damon. Oh, wait, this is Nicole Ackman herself.
I did. I spent the whole film. I just wanted to fight him.
Oh, God.
Oh, this is good. Mina Stein says, how did I like them apples? I did not. I'm going to give that a like right now.
Oh, my gosh. I don't even... Oh, okay. So somebody whose username is Doomy or Dommy. I don't... Yeah. Just walked right into that one. Said relocation of Sandal movie to China plus Army of Monsters. WTF. Half star for the monsters acting. Winky face. I mean, I really think the monster was giving their very best, like, effort.
Oh, skipping down a little bit, this person, Simon, just says, F this movie.
Oh, gosh. And skipping to the next page, Beagle Bagel said, so much action and I'm still bored.
That's a mood. Oh, I like this one. Cherryman Kai says, in all caps, I remember when people got mad at this film because of the two white main characters instead of just the simple fact that it's bad.
Hey, where was the other white? Oh, is it William Dafoe they're talking about?
I guess, probably.
Because I wouldn't consider him a main character.
I mean, I think in general, I consider Willem Dafoe a main character no matter how small his role is. Because he's Willem
Yes,
Dafoe.
this is a William Dafoe love pod. We love William Dafoe.
In this household, we love and respect Willem Dafoe, even when he makes movies like this.
Oh gosh.
Oh, this is good. Working Beauty says, the female protagonist says at some point, forget what you have seen. If only I could. I feel like I remember you pointing out that line during it.
Yes, there was so many very meta lines in this film. Oh, okay. So Cinnamon, where you at said, you either retired a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become a sellout.
I mean...
Shots fired.
Oh, Sebas Pimbear, that was probably wrong, says, as soon as the green dogs appeared, I wanted to walk out of the cinema. I'm pretty sure Matt Damon had some debt with the Chinese mafia, and they made him do this boring piece of trash. You'll get more fun out of playing with rocks. Don't watch it.
Oh, savage. Also, I can't imagine paying to see this film. I mean, I paid to see this film.
I can't imagine
$3.
paying more than like the $4 that I paid to see this film. And I was still mad that I spent money on it.
Oh my gosh. Oh, there's just so many. There's
like,
just page after page.
I want to find like one last really good one.
I know, I'm looking. Wait, where's the one about trimmers?
Oh, that one was funny.
For reference, while we were watching this film together, Nicole texted me that somebody had reviewed it on Letterboxd and said that the film was just Trimmers. At that point, I went, how could this film be like Trimmers? Because up until that moment, I did not know there were monsters in this film. And then as soon as the film started, I went, oh no, this is Trimmers.
Okay, wait, I'm going to just rapid fire read a few more.
Okay.
Because the page I'm on is brilliant. I think this is the worst movie I've ever seen. Lizards. The next one, the fuck did I just watch?
Oh, good Lord.
This review is just crap. This review says, I spent this entire film reading Martin Scorsese's IMDb page instead of actually watching. Did you know he has asthma? And finally, this one really, really sums it up. Catherine says, would rather jump off of the Great Wall than have to watch this movie again.
Oh gosh. Here's one good one that said, this half point is just for Pedro Pascal.
Oh.
He really was the redeeming quality of this film, in my opinion.
Yeah. Not that he even got that much to do.
No, he really didn't, which is a whole rant I'm willing to go on. But not at this time.
If you want to know more about this film, because I'm hoping for your sakes that you're listening without having seen it, and if you're wondering if you should watch it, don't watch it if you haven't. We'll tell you what you need to know. But this movie came out in 2016, and it was directed by Zhang Yimou, I believe is how you say his name, who is an icon, really, of Chinese cinema. He's done a lot of like art house films in China. He did the opening ceremony at the Beijing Olympics. And it really is an interesting film in that it was really meant to be this great big collaboration between American cinema and Chinese cinema, and kind of a way to bring the two together and make this movie that would kind of appeal equally to both markets.
Yes, and it was one of the biggest productions in the Chinese film history. And actually, the film was produced by Legendary Entertainment, which had been acquired by the Chinese company Dalian Wanda the same year that the movie came out. So it was the first major American production company that had kind of come under Chinese control. And so it was this whole like merging of the two cultures and trying to work together to make something that would appeal to both markets. And it did not.
It had a budget of $150 million, as some of those reviews mentioned. And it only earned $334 million, which of course sounds like a good number. It did recoup, but it is so much less than they thought it would earn. And it also got bad reviews in both countries, which they didn't expect. I'm not sure why they didn't expect that, but they didn't. And a part of that, I think, is that, you know, it had this Asian director, but the film was written by 6 American guys. And first of all, anytime I think you have a screenplay and you have more than 3 writers, something's up.
Yes, I was definitely alarmed by the sheer number of writers on this production.
And one of the writers, I think you said, Maggie, like, it has actually done some other things that were decent.
Yes. So one of the writers on this movie was Carlo Bernard, who is the creator and writer for Narcos and Narcos Mexico, which if you've listened to previous podcasts, you know I'm currently watching the series too many times over. And it's really fantastic. So I don't know what happened.
But the film stars Matt Damon,
which is, you know, the first mistake.
which is unfortunate. But it also has Willem Dafoe, as we've mentioned, Pedro Pascal, and I feel like, I'm going to mispronounce this, and I'm sorry. I just want to put out a statement. I'm sorry. I looked up how to pronounce it. I'm going to still say it wrong. It's Jing Tian, I think.
I think that's right. Yes.
And it's set in the 11th century in China. It's a little bit unclear when exactly, but according to
tried to track it down.
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, an article set a date supposedly that, you know, had come from press stuff or something. And I will say for it, it is meant to be about a legend. It's not like a straight historical film, and we recognize that, we do. But if you're pretending to have taken place in a certain period, then I think you're inviting a critique of your historical accuracy. It's not one of those kind of generic medieval films where, like, that you see a lot of, particularly like set in Europe, where they don't really give any sort of actual time frame. So you're just supposed to understand that it's like a medieval type fantasy. Whereas this actually, I think, was aiming for something specific. And we're not going to critique the actual, like, fantasy side of it as much, but there's still a lot left to find issue with, I think.
The script is really the biggest issue of this entire production, I think. I think it's the script. And I would
say the script and the CGI and then Matt Damon.
Which, you know, when I was researching this and kind of like reflecting on it, I thought back to all of the legendary entertainment films that I have watched, and all of them have subpar CGI.
The CGI in this movie is laughably bad. Like, I honestly think it's some of the worst that I've ever seen. And I've, like, you know how the CGI, Maggie, I know you used to watch it, and I did too. You know the bad CGI on, like, Once Upon a Time?
Yes.
This was worse. This was legitimately worse, I think. And it was in a $150 million movie.
Yes, which came out in 2016, not in 1996.
I think my thing with the film is if it had come out even as late as like 2006, I would take a lot less issue with it. But the fact that it was made with this budget in 2016 is what makes me think it's like absolute trash. Like, there's no excuse for how bad it is.
Yeah, it's bad. It's like Warcraft level bad. I don't know if anybody has seen Warcraft. It was bad.
It is now my least favorite movie I've ever watched. Like, it is the lowest rated thing on my Letterboxd account.
Yeah, you know, I for a really long time have firmly stood my ground that The Tree of Life was the worst film I've ever watched in my entire life. Like, this is really close, if not like completely blowing that one out of the water.
I think it has some of the most underdeveloped characters I've ever seen. And the thing is, you can get by with a movie with underdeveloped characters if your action is good enough. Like, I think about something like Outlaw King with Chris Pine, which there was no character development, but I didn't care because those battle scenes were fantastic. But you gotta have like something going for you, and this film really doesn't. It was a good concept.
The characters were all very much caricatures. Like, Matt Damon was very much the stereotypical, I'm not entirely certain what nationality he was supposed to be because his accent was bad, American pretending to be Irish.
Talk about the accent, which like came and went. And my favorite thing though is that he has this like, it seems like he's attempting an Irish accent for the first portion of the film, and then it just completely drops. Which also, I'm like, did they film this in order or something? Because I feel like they don't typically do that. But like, was he that shoddy with the accent and it just ended up all being front heavy on the film, or did he actually give up on it at some point?
I feel like he just went, I can't do this.
and stopped. And I want to say, I want to like do a PSA. I don't like Matt Damon. That's fine. We all get to have actors that we don't like. Also, like, I've seen an interview with him. But I can admit when he has a good performance. I think Matt Damon is fantastic in The Martian. I thought he was actually very good in Ford v Ferrari, even though, you know, that was the Christian Bale show, really. But he's so bad in this movie. He kind of like ruins this movie that's already very bad.
It's true. Like I was saying to you when we were watching the film, if they had just got rid of Matt Damon's character, given that entire role to Pedro Pascal and like built that character, I felt like that would have been much more interesting.
Absolutely.
Because
I mean,
Matt Damon was sheer white bread. Like even the character background that they like randomly throughout, you know, the expose of it all, exposition, it was just not useful at all.
I also, if they wanted to cast just like a random hot white man, this was made in 2016. You could have called Chris Hemsworth and he would have looked good in the ponytail, unlike Matt Damon.
Yes. I'm going to say something very controversial. Also, Chris Pratt could have played this role better.
Any Chris could have played this role better.
True.
Pine, Pratt,
Hemsworth,
now
I'm
Evans,
Chris Pine.
Messina, any of them.
Oh gosh, yeah. Anybody but Matt.
Honestly, actually, now that I think about it, also having just mentioned him, like I would have, like if Christian Bale wanted to do this role, he probably could have brought something interesting to the film.
Yes.
But, it's like it's not just that it's Matt Damon; it's that like it's Matt Damon like at his worst.
Yes, and you know I'm also camp. Let's hate on Matt Damon. I have only liked him in one film my entire life, and that was, admittedly, a truly terrible film. The Brothers Grimm, which came out a million years ago. Heath Ledger was in it. Brilliant film. Actually, really good acting from Matt Damon. But truly the only time I've liked Matt Damon.
Yeah, I think the other thing about the movie is that it had a pretty good concept. Like, I love this idea of them wanting to make something to kind of blend American and Chinese cinema and have something that really is meant to appeal to both audiences. But the thing is, it had really shoddy execution on multiple fronts, and there were good things in it, which we'll talk about later. But it just feels like they ended up taking, like, the worst parts of both film industries.
Yes.
And combining them somehow.
And I kind of want to lay blame at the feet of the writing team because the writing was just so bad. I mean, you know, I expect a movie like this to have a few good, like, zingy one-liners. But there were countless zingy one-liners, which were the only highlights of this film, really, in terms of the dialogue. It was just a script full of snark that even then wasn't really all that great.
It wasn't like earned?
No, it was just like thrown out there. Just thrown for no good reason.
And some of those lines, man.
Yeah, I wrote a bunch of them down because I was like, these are so bad. They're laughable. And I didn't sign up for this. Which part? A lot of it, but mostly monsters, which is me watching this film.
That should have been my review.
That's going to be my review. Don't steal my review.
Yeah, I mean, we really didn't sign up for the monsters.
No, I genuinely 100% did not expect monsters. I remember seeing trailers for this movie, and I do not remember seeing monsters.
To be fair, it's kind of my fault because you were like, can we do this movie? And I just said yes, and I didn't look up anything until I watched it, which means that I put trust in you, and it was a mistake.
I'm so sorry.
I mean, to be fair, it was worth it because we're getting to do this podcast. We're getting to like share our hatred for this movie now. And I will say, Maggie and I watched the movie at the same time so that we could talk while we watched it.
It was an experience.
If you think it's worth it to watch this movie, I will tell you now, it's only worth it if you have someone that you can make fun of it with.
And alcohol.
I would not have made it through this film on my own because it's one of those movies, you know, there are movies that are so bad that they're good. This is not that. It's just bad. Like, I was legitimately bored for whole sections of it.
That was the section that Matt Damon was like the sole focus.
That's probably what did it, yeah.
Like, I realized that on reflection. I was like, that period of time where I got really bored was just Matt Damon. There's all Matt Damon close-ups.
It also feels like it's one of those films that has some cool tricks, but
Yes.
they just use them over and over. And by the end of it, I'm like, your acrobatics are no longer fun to me because you're doing the same ones that you did 20 minutes ago.
Over and over again.
Yeah.
And honestly, the worst part was whoever thought, hey, you know what we could do to make Matt Damon even sexier? He's not. Than he already is. He's not. We should put a rat tail on him. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but, here we are.
I literally cannot figure out what their motivation for that was because it just doesn't really make sense.
No, because he just went and shaved. So why did he not just cut that off too?
The best scene in the whole film is when, so basically the Chinese people decide that they're going to let them live or whatever for a while. And Willem Dafoe is like, you smell, take a bath. And so at this point, Matt Damon's character and Pedro Pascal's characters are have these big beards and their hair is long. And then there's this scene where they walk back into the room and all the other people just slow clap for the fact that they've shaved and cut their hair. And
it's so bad.
I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, oh my, what is happening? That's what I knew. And that's in the first half hour of the movie. And I was like,
it's so bad.
It can only go downhill from here.
And my favorite part of that moment was when Pedro Pascal's character, Pere Tovar is the name of the character, is just like, I want food, and just leaves. And then sits there and grumpily eats food and yawns a few times. And I was just like, wow, this film got really meta.
Honestly, that was me while watching it. If you do watch this film, you can assume that anything that character does was my reaction to watching the movie.
Every line, every reaction, even when he tried to leave the plot, he knocks Matt Damon out and then hauls ass out of there.
What is it? Yeah, with Willem Dafoe, which is a mood. What is it that he says when he's like, I'm only saving you to kill you myself?
Kill you myself.
Yeah, me.
Yes.
Me to this film.
Oh, gosh.
So I do think it's worth saying about it, though, that whenever this film was getting ready to be released, I guess, whenever the trailers dropped and everything, there were a bunch of claims about it being whitewashing and a white savior movie and whatever, because it is Matt Damon starring in this otherwise largely Asian film. And I don't think that's true, actually. For the most part. First of all, he's shown to be pretty incompetent for a lot of the movie. There is some weird sexism going on with the fact that he keeps saving this woman general.
Yes.
And I'm
a badass.
She doesn't need saved. She's kicking ass on her own. But I don't think it is white saviour-y. And it's it's not that he's playing a role that's meant for an Asian actor. It was written for a white actor. I do think there's a good question of whether or not that role needed to exist in the first place. But they definitely were just trying to get an American household name actor into the film to give them that box office draw.
Mm-hmm.
So I get what they were doing, and I don't think there are many bad things you can say about this film, but I don't think that's one of them.
And they even for a while there, we thought they were going with this stupid romance route, but they didn't go there, which is the first time I will probably praise not going the romance route in a movie.
There was some weird tension,
but it didn't, no follow through.
There was one moment where we thought they were going to kiss, and we were like, no, don't do it. Don't do it.
I was can I time travel back to 2016 and stop this kiss from happening? I was successful. It didn't happen.
Thank you for saving us, Maggie, since you did the time travel.
You're welcome.
So we wanted to talk about, first just kind of address the historical accuracy of this film, and then talk about some of the mythological aspects of it, let's say. And then, as per usual, Maggie's going to talk about the costume design, and then we're also going to share some actual historical information about some topics that are kind of touched on in the movie. Just, I want to lay that all out now, so you don't think that I'm just going to talk about how much I dislike Matt Damon for the rest of this podcast. If you're looking at the timestamp now and you're wondering how many ways I can say that I don't like Matt Damon, worry not. We're going to leave him behind like the movie should have.
Yes.
So So to be fair to this film, overwhelmingly the historical accuracy wasn't as bad as I expected whenever I watched like the first 10 minutes of it. It's honestly less that there are historically inaccurate things in it and more that there are things that like just don't make sense in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Wikipedia page for the film says that it takes place during the rule of Emperor Renzong of the Zong dynasty, which was from 1010 to 1063. So, just kind of to set the time period, one of the glaring issues that Maggie took note of was
so mad
that there's this scene where a lot of the Chinese characters say rest in peace.
After one of the generals is killed by a Taote.
Which, started being said by Christians in the 18th century. It comes from Latin. It's a Christian phrase, and certainly at this time, A, wasn't being said by anyone, and B, couldn't have made it to China yet. So, you know,
weird choice.
That's a weird choice. It's one of those things where you can tell that the script was written by a bunch of Americans.
And side note, if there is anyone who is listening to this who speaks Mongolian and may have watched this film, I would love to know if that was just a bad translation, if it actually is something else, because I don't speak anything other than English. And I was wondering today if that was like a mistranslation and it was just whatever made sense for closed captioning.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So the thing that really gave us a headache, and we actually backed the movie up so that Maggie could write this down for me. So Matt Damon's character is talking about the fact that he's a mercenary and he's, you know, doesn't really have a cause that he believes in or whatever. And he says that he was a gleaner, a child who cleaned up battlefields, a page, a pikeman's boy. He fought for Harold against the Danes. He saved the Duke's life. He fought for Spain against the Franks, for the Franks against the Boulogne, and fought for the Pope. Now, first of all, this totally makes me question how old he is meant to be, because that's a lot of stuff.
So much.
And
how did he survive?
We have a lot of questions. Mainly just around the fact that I don't think that like logistically makes sense. So we tried to figure out if any of these like specific claims actually worked. The only Harold that we could find that this made sense for, who like fought the Danes at any point, was Harold Sigurdsson, who was the king of Norway from 1015 to 1066. And he did attempt to claim the Danish throne until he finally was kind of stopped with that in 1064. So it could be that that's the Harold that they're referencing. It's also unclear. I think there's some issues around when he, like all the things that he says that he's done, which take place in the same time frame that the movie, the same like 50-year set that the movie is said to be within, and if it's possible for him to have done all of them. It's really unclear what this mention of fighting for Spain against the Franks is, because there weren't any major battles between Spain and France during this period. It could be like part of the French crusading in Spain and like the Spanish trying to repel that, I guess.
Yeah, that was the only thing I could possibly imagine it being, because there were a lot of like weird skirmishes during that whole Holy War Crusade period where the Franks kept trying to fight the Muslims in Spain. So it's possible that they hired them and were like, hey, go fight these people for us. But how old is Matt Damon?
And there's a lot of popes in this period, actually. So, like, there's any one of them it could have been, and they fought a lot of battles. So that I'm fine with. But I think the thing that, like, obviously, I don't like to be one of those people who gets super, super nitpicky about historical accuracy. But this is such an easy thing. There were so many battles that used mercenaries in this era. It wouldn't have been hard to find legitimate ones.
And again, it was weird exposition. Like, why is he sitting here explaining this? And it comes about in such a way that's like just so like shoehorning this, like, let's list a bunch of random historical periods and like see what, you know, happens. Because she's talking about like, who do you have, like, who do you support? Like, who is your loyalty with? What flag do you fly under? And instead of just being like, I'm a mercenary, I don't really like fight for any one specific person, he's like, let me give you my backstory in 5 seconds.
And he just rattles this off, which basically, we got questions.
So many.
So, on the upside, it is true that the Chinese had gunpowder before the rest of the world, and Maggie's going to talk about that in detail a bit later. But the whole idea is that our main characters are in China because they've gone to get the black powder, which is gunpowder. So that's true. And a lot of the crazy weapons that they show you on the wall aren't accurate, and that definitely wasn't how the wall was actually outfitted. But they did actually have like the gunpowder pottery bombs that they show, so that's one point for them. And the biggest thing I think is that there's no historical basis for this specific story, and Matt Damon's character, who's called William, certainly is not based on any sort of real person. It is very much supposed to be a legend, which is one of those things where it's like there are so many Chinese legends you couldn't have picked a real one. But hey, at least they're not fudging up like actual history, I guess. So
Yes.
like I said, it's not the worst movie in terms of historical accuracy, in terms of like actual things I can point to that they got wrong, other than bad CGI monsters.
Yes. And speaking of the monsters, which I am still so shocked about being real. Real as in it's a real legend. It's a real legend. Which I could go off on like Petticoats and Poppies like after show and go on some like weird tangents about the fact that these creatures are seen throughout numerous different historical lore in numerous different countries. So if you really want to have that conversation, you can hit me up on Twitter and I will be happy to have that conversation because I am a big fan of like legends and myths. You know, I will just be making my own BuzzFeed Unsolved to talk about these creatures. But I, like I've said multiple times, did not know there were monsters in this film. If I had known there were monsters in this film and had done some research before going in entirely blind, I might have actually enjoyed this film. I think I gave Nicole like 3 heart attacks this week because as I was researching, I kept being like, hey, this wasn't actually a bad film. No, it's still a bad film. It's just there are certain elements to it that could have made a really, really good film. Like
I said, it had potential. It's a good concept.
It's a great concept. Like 12-year-old me would have eaten this movie up. Like so good in terms of like legends and stuff. But so the Tao Te are real mythical creatures in Chinese mythology. They are commonly seen in bronze artifacts dating back to like the first millennium BC. So a really long history of these creatures being part of their kind of like historical lore. They are considered one of the 4 evils, and they represent greed, which I thought was so cool considering there's a theme in this film. There's this whole moment in The Great Wall where Pedro's character and William Dafoe's characters decide to steal the black powder rather than staying and helping the Chinese army fight. And it's really like they're fueled by greed. So I thought that was some nice kind of paralleling character motivations with what this, motivation for the creature is. And that was when I researched that and I found that out. I was like, oh, this film's actually kind of smart. And now I'm going to butcher a bunch of names. So the creatures, the Tao Te, are described in the Shanhai Jing, in the classic of the mountains and the sea, that the creature was described as like this crazy multi-creature thing. That was a horrible sentence, and I'm so sorry you just had to listen to that. Okay, so it had the body of a sheep, the teeth of a tiger, the face of a human, also human hands, and it had eyes under its armpits, and allegedly it had the voice of a baby. Which, what? And
she sounds charming.
She's a very charming creature. And the creatures in the movie had eyes in their armpits, which I thought was a weird choice. And I kept being really distracted by it. Which now I know it is because that's how the creature actually looked. In folk tales, the Tao Te eats everything in sight, which is what they're doing in the movie as well. They're so greedy, they're even known to eat their own bodies. So once they've eaten everything that they see, they end up cannibalizing themselves, which is crazy. But again, greed, glutton, that whole thing. You can often find the taotai put into like ancient cooking vessels. So in antiquities from this era, you will see like the head of a taotai on a cooking vessel. And there are legends suggesting that when the Yellow Emperor beheaded Shi Yu, again, slaughtering names, his head fell onto the earth and he became the taotai. So that is some crazy legends. And I kind of wish they had discussed this more in the film, because I think this would have been better than 5 quippy lines between Matt Damon and Pedro Pascal. But, that's just me, because I feel like this gives the film like an extra depth, knowing that it's truly rooted in a legend that has been in China since the first BC. So what are your thoughts on that, Nicole?
I mean, I am impressed. And again, this goes back to like good concept, bad writing. It is very cool that they actually tried to, kind of take it from actual mythology, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the most horrifying CGI I've ever seen in my whole life. And not like in a good way. Not like, oh, they're so scary. Like, they weren't scary to me because they were so ridiculous looking.
You mean you weren't a fan of them squirting green goo every time they got stabbed?
Every time they squirted the green goo, I was like, this is where I would have turned it off if I weren't watching this for the podcast. When in reality, I would have turned it off probably in the first 10 minutes. But I also do wish that they had kind of taken their aesthetic design a little bit more from the kind of design that you typically see in this period with Chinese like mythological creatures, because I think that would have also been a very cool nod, but it just looks very commonplace CGI movie monster.
Especially since the monsters don't match the legend, except for the eyes.
Exactly.
Those creatures look like, oh God, I don't even know what they look like. They look like some creature I've seen somewhere before, but
it kind of reminds me of when kids draw dinosaurs, but they're not really going for a specific type.
Yes. It's just painful to watch a movie that came out in 2016 have CGI so horrific that it makes Helm's Deep and Two Towers from 2012 look like a masterpiece, which it is a masterpiece. And I'm not knocking that, because that is like one of the best CGI moments in a film that I can ever think of. But the fact that in 2012, there was better CGI than a film that came out 4 years ago. Is it 4 years ago? Yeah, 4 years ago is painful.
I'm just saying that, like, if you showed me this CGI and didn't show me any other CGI, I would say it was an argument for never using CGI again.
Truth. And, it's a shame, because so much work was put into the production design and into the costume design and really into creating this, like, beautiful masterpiece. And that part just caused the whole film to really fall apart. I mean, they're not just that, but CGI script, Matt Damon.
We have 3 issues with the film, and they are.
Yes, I'm so sorry. And if Matt Damon ever listens to this podcast, I don't care.
I'll fight you.
We are joining Jimmy Kimmel on the anti-Matt Damon.
I feel like our listeners really do need to know that I am like the softest of people. In real life, I never want to fight anyone. It's just Matt Damon.
And I'm the one that's more likely to get into a fight. And I'm just like, I'll just watch and eat popcorn.
I don't know what it is that he brings out in me. But Maggie, I know you did some research in the costume and production design, which really is one of the only strong points of this film.
Yes, it is gorgeous. So with the costume design, as soon as I saw this film, like, I knew the costumes were going to have, taken considerable work. They're just watching the film, the colors that they used, you could see so many different patterns and so many different materials used in every single costume. I was really excited to kind of like research and delve deep into this. And watching all of the featurettes about the costumes and the interviews with the costume designer, Maya's Rubio, I really started to shift in my opinions of the film yet again, much to Nicole's horror, because they put so much work into this. Maya's said that they spent 12 months living in China, designing and making these costumes. Most of the costumes, if not all of them, were completely handmade completely custom built for every single performer who wore them. She said in one interview that each costume had up to 18 costumers working on it, which is insane. One of the big challenges she noted was the fact that she had to create 6 very kind of individual regiments to be represented in the film, and that the director wanted each of them to be portrayed by a different animal, which Nicole and I had some funny comments when we were watching that because they are primary colors, and at least 4 of them look like they could have been Hogwarts houses. We were waiting the entire time for Slytherin to show up, and they did. But it was really cool to see how they had infused so much of the Chinese culture into these costumes. They were really dedicated to utilizing Chinese textures, textiles, fabrics, and they even utilized some of the techniques from medieval China, which I thought was really nice. The colors were really vital for both the costumer and the director. The director is really known for his bold color choices, and I think Maya's was a really good choice for a costumer on this because she's also done some work that really revolved around colors and color symbolism. So I thought that was a really good kind of marriage of ideas and experiences, I guess. What I thought was really interesting was, it's really, really common to sell off costumes. I actually own a costume that was from Man in the High Castle. After that production ended, they auctioned off all of the costumes, and I bought one in an auction because I just wanted to say I had a costume from a TV show I liked. But usually production companies don't auction things off as quickly as this one did, at least in my opinion of watching costume auctions. They auctioned everything off in 2019, so just 3 years after the film came out. The rarest grouping that was kind of the most sought off pieces during the auction were those Cirque du Soleil-esque wall repelling teams, the women's armor. They ended up actually selling around like $3,750 each, which is crazy. Most of the other pieces sold off between like $150 to like $500, which is about common for these pieces. And it's a real shame because there's a great video that Adam Savage from Mythbusters did where he unboxed some of these costumes from the auction. It was the Weta Workshop in New Zealand, which was behind some of the visuals and craftsmanship of some of the more kind of intense pieces like the shields and the helmets. He did this unboxing of all the costumes and gave like a really great up close look at the work put into these costumes. And it just made me sick seeing how much work went into these costumes and how badly this film just tanked. I mean, every piece of armor had these little like scales that were made out of like a polymer substance, and they were hand painted, every single one of these. And I think just looking at it, there was probably 200 on each shoulder. Each little piece was hand painted with multiple different colors so that when it was like on the camera, it kind of like you could see the different colors. So that was just, really cool.
Yeah, it really just breaks my heart to think of like how much work they put into these costumes.
It's insane. I mean, every single piece, every shoe, every skirt, every underpiece was custom made for each of the performers. And if you watch this film, there are a ton of actors.
So many.
Both background and main characters that, they spared no expense on making these costumes. I mean, the work put into this really makes me sick as a costumer, knowing how much work and how much sleep these people like lost working on this.
I also want to call out the fact that Maya Rubio actually was nominated for an Oscar this past year for her work on Jojo Rabbit, which I think is also a really interesting use of color. I think she's one of the best costumers in terms of using color.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got to interview her early this year, and we had a really great chat, and she is just the nicest lady. And she's very proud of her achievements and what she's been able to do, but very humble. And I really am glad to see that she's gotten to kind of move on to some projects where she's kind of gotten to see her work more recognized. Obviously, with like Jojo Rabbit, she's also worked with Watiti on things like Thor Ragnarok, and I believe she's also going to be doing Thor God of Love and Thunder. So hopefully she continues to get to do more projects where the incredible work that she puts in is more able to be recognized because the film
Mhm.
itself isn't such a trash fire.
Yes. And she also, I think it was either she made a point about it or someone else in one of the featurettes, but there was 100 different countries represented by the cast and crew on this production. So they really like fully inclusive film, which I loved hearing about. And so it's just a shame that this film did not do better because they tried. So since they're probably tired of hearing me talk, do you want to do the Great Wall of China first?
Yes,
I just
live
realized
for
it's like
it.
a wall of text.
Um, so one of the topics that we wanted to share some information about was the Great Wall of China, because for the fact that this movie is called The Great Wall, you really learn nothing about the Great Wall in it, which I thought was a shame. And I actually learned stuff that I either didn't know or had known and forgotten about the Great Wall while I was researching this. So the wall was actually built over a period of like hundreds of years and not all at once. And it really got started in earnest when Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who was the founder of the Qin dynasty in 221 BC, connected previous fortifications that had been built in the period between like 771 and 221 BC. And it was to protect against nomads invading, not against mythological creatures. But there were around 400,000 workers who are said to have died while building the wall in this Qin period, and many of them were actually buried within the wall, which is really kind of horrifying. And it basically is a mass grave in some ways. And
Oh my
most of these workers
gosh.
were either soldiers or convicts.
Okay, I did not know that.
I like honestly, they should have made this movie, but have it like be like a ghost story or something instead of green goose courting monsters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is really horrifying to think about. And so later dynasties rebuilt and expanded the wall, and it's gone through a lot of flux before becoming what it is today. And the wall was never particularly good at keeping out enemies. Like several different groups managed to get over the wall, so it didn't really do its job. And what's interesting is that if you look at it over time, emperors kind of flip-flop back and forth. There were some who really used it as a strategic thing, and then there were other emperors who instead would just try and use diplomacy and different things so that they didn't need a wall and kind of let it crumble. So most of what remains today was actually built during the Ming Dynasty, so that's like the 14th to 17th centuries, and is made of stone and brick. And it's now a tourist destination and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it is a huge tourist draw for the country, and that's kind of its only function today. And there are parts of it today that are in ruin, but from like the beginning part to the end, it is over 13,000 miles long, which
It's
is
insane.
really impressive. But from what I understand, it's not like 13,000 miles of like one wall built up. There are places where it's kind of spotty from what I could find. So it really is an impressive achievement, but also has some very tragic parts to it. And it's also like not the kind of strategic tool that they thought it was going to be. So I do think it's really interesting to kind of learn more about the actual history of it, because I feel like whenever you think of Chinese landmark, in the same way that if you think France, you think Eiffel Tower, you think
Mhm.
China, you think the Great Wall. But this movie wouldn't really teach you anything about it.
No, really the only thing that this movie did, really well with was talking about the black powder
Mm-hmm.
and talking about the gunpowder, which was in fact invented in China in the 9th century during the late Tang dynasty. Again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names. Taoists originally used gunpowder for medicinal purposes, which I thought was really interesting. It was first used for warfare in around 904 AD, and the Silk Road did help it spread westwards, which I think they kind of alluded to the Silk Road a little bit in this film, but again, it was nothing like overt. The first detailed descriptions of gunpowder was referred to as fire cannon in warfare. And that was in a battle that took place in 1126 during the Song Dynasty, which is the period that this film is set in. And by the 11th century, the Chinese were using the ceramic bombs filled with gunpowder and firing them off with catapults, which you do see in the film. So that was definitely something that they did right. I don't think they were using it to fight off Tao Te. I mean, hey, I wasn't around back then. Maybe they were, but they definitely tried to get the black powder accurate, I think. And definitely it would have been something that would have motivated people to steal it, like in the film, because it would have been something that would have earned Westerners quite a bit of coin taking it back home or taking it back to the highest bidder, because that would have really revolutionized warfare in different parts of the world. So that was what I learned about black powder. I definitely feel like this film gets better if you research the things mentioned in it. I
think that the more you research it, the more you will have appreciation for the people who worked on it.
And what they were trying to do. Absolutely. I definitely feel like I don't know, I'm very easy to please.
You are.
I'm very easy to please. And this movie was a burning trash can. But I feel like if you do the research, which you shouldn't have to do to see a film, but if you do the research, like, you will learn things about this film and what they were trying to do that is actually quite fascinating.
I also want to reiterate that had this film not come out so recently, had it not had such a large budget, I think I wouldn't have as many issues with it. But it really does not feel like a 2016 movie.
No. And honestly, I mean, my cryptid loving soul really liked learning that the Tao Te was real. And maybe that's the redeeming quality, the fact that for mythology, it's something that was real.
I also will say one thing that I guess we didn't touch on is the fact that we do get to see a lot of cool female warriors. There's a female general.
I just realized we didn't talk about that at all.
Isn't really historically accurate, I suppose. But it's fun to see.
No, and actually in the costume design, they mentioned that. They talked about the fact that, you know, they had no real frame of reference for female warriors. So they really had to create that whole concept on their own. And so I thought the repelling Cirque du Soleil was kind of an interesting decision.
Yeah, interesting.
Yes. Really not intelligent warfare, though, because I feel like rappelling yourself down with a spike into a giant horde of Tao Te is maybe not the best idea. It's like dangling a carrot in front of a horse.
Right. I mean, but probably still a better idea than Damon being like, my little bow and arrow can do anything.
Also, there's a moment in the battle when he's down there, he goes in blind to try to catch the Tao Te. And Pedro Pascal's character just appears out of nowhere. And I was like, where did he just come from? He just appears.
See, there's so much in this film that
there's a lot. I recommend drinking a glass of wine before, a glass of wine during, and a glass of wine after just to cope.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for indulging us and letting us discuss whatever this movie was. We promise we'll be back next time with a better episode, or not a better episode, but an episode about a better movie.
It'll be a movie that doesn't have Matt Damon in it.
We can promise you that one. But to end on a better note, I wanted to talk a bit about our digital exhibit for this episode, which is not an exhibit in the normal sense, but it's the fact that the Charles Dickens Museum has started putting their collection online. And for those who don't know, I did my grad work in London and I lived there for a year. And for the year that I lived there, I was a weekly volunteer at the Charles Dickens Museum, which is located on Doughty Street in London. And it's this really fantastic little museum, not far from the British Museum, or Sir John Soane's, if you know that one. And it's the first house that Charles Dickens lived in with his wife and his children. He moved in 1837 when he was about, I want to say, 25 years old. And he spent a couple of years living there. He wrote some of his first really well-known works there. It was while he was living there that he abandoned using his pen name of Boz and started writing under his own name. And it's where he really started to come into himself. And it's actually the only Dickens home that's open to the public. His house in Gad's Hill, which is the only house that he ever owned, does still stand, but it's actually a boys' school. And so everything that the Dickens Fellowship kind of has of Dickens is in this house. And it's got everything from his writing desk to his papers, his portraits, a lock of his hair, the dried flower that laid on his coffin. It really has just an absolute treasure trove of objects if you have any interest in Dickens Or if you just have any interest in a Victorian household, I had a lot of friends come see it who maybe weren't particularly interested in Dickens, but thought it was really cool to see the house, which is really properly set up as a house. It doesn't feel like a museum. It's much more on the house museum side of things. And they have over 100,000 items related to Dickens and his work, and they have rotating exhibits that come through when they're open. But while they've been closed because of quarantine, they actually just launched a digital collection, and so they're adding more content to it every month. And that can be found if you go to www.collections.dickensmuseum.com. And you can search it, or you can look at it through themes or collections, which are kind of already curated to let you see some cool items, because, you know, it is this huge collection. And if you do look at it and you do enjoy it, the Dickens Museum is an independent charity. It doesn't receive any regular government funding. So if you are in a position where you can make a donation to them on their website, that would really go a long ways towards keeping this small but really important museum afloat. The people who work there are really incredible people, and they're doing really important work talking about Dickens, reinterpreting Dickens, and also just giving this glimpse at life in Victorian London. And they are in a little bit of danger right now because they've been closed for so long. So I know I'm going to be giving to them as soon as I get my stimulus check in the mail. But I would really appreciate it if any of you check it out and are able to give as well. So that's kind of my pledge. I'm no longer affiliated with them, but I did volunteer there for a year, and I have, honestly, some of my best memories are in that place. So I'm very personally dedicated to making sure they make it out of this okay, and would appreciate it, and would also love to hear if any of you guys listening have been there.
I have.
I know.
Yes, I love that museum. I have quite a few postcards from there, not only from the ones that I purchased, but the ones Nicole sent me while she was living in London.
Yeah.
So with that, we come to the close of our episode. I cannot believe this is already episode 5. I am so sorry that I made all of you listen to this. This episode is solely my fault. Big fan of Pedro Pascal's work, so I was like, oh, hey, this is a period film. We should totally watch this. If you also love his work, I recommend just going and looking at Tumblr for gifs from this movie, because it's not worth it. I mean, he has a few funny, witty lines, but like, this whole film is just avoid.
We would love to hear from you guys about if you enjoy us talking about bad films or good films more.
Yeah,
like
how do you want us? Do you want us to talk about like only good films?
Or do you want to hear us trash bad films? If you have a bad film that you would love for us to pick apart, particularly anything that you just find like really historically horrible, like really inaccurate in an offensive way or anything like that, let us know, because we are happy to watch bad movies and then badmouth them. We don't just want to talk about good films, because that's not going to give you an actual realistic view of the movie industry. So,
and like extra points if you recommend the favorite in that list.
Yeah, a lot of extra points. I do think, would you guys be interested at some point in hearing us talk about how Shakespeare in Love is a great movie, but a terrible historical period piece?
It's such a good film.
But there's so much to say about it.
So much.
Unlike this, which is just bad.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Not just to Nicole, but just to everyone who had to listen to this episode. If you've made it to here, you have my undying love.
I'm also very sorry if anyone went and watched this film to be able to listen to this episode.
Also, I'm sorry if anyone actually likes Matt Damon.
Yeah, if we have any Matt Damon fans, I promise I don't have like a personal vendetta against him. Like,
she does.
I don't wish any harm upon him. I just wish him to stay out of my films. I want to make that very clear. I just would prefer not to see him.
We're very much like Jimmy Kimmel in this situation. We just don't like Matt Damon. He is the butt of every joke.
I honestly think that every person is entitled to like 3 celebrities that they just do not like and do not want to see, and Matt Damon is one of mine.
He's probably one of mine too, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Thank you so much for listening to our 5th episode of Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies.
We would love to hear from you on social media and to hear what you guys think of The Great Wall. And again, if you have any films that you'd like us to review, good films, bad films, in the middle films, films that you're wondering if they're historically accurate and want to get us to do the research for you, send them our way.
Yes. You can find us on social media at History Girls at the Movies podcast, which is HGATM podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can find me over at Maggie of the Town and Nicole over at Nicole Ackman 16.
You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Erglou Media's website. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Every other episode, we're going to be reading out our Apple Podcast reviews. So if you want to be features and Podchaser reviews, that's true. And we'll also be reading out, some fun tweets and Instagram comments. So if you want to be featured, that is a surefire way to get onto the episode.
Yes, and we love hearing from you guys. It's awesome to get feedback from our listeners. And, we'll be back soon with another exciting episode as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective. Until then, stay safe and healthy. You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies,
History Girls at the Movies.